Well, thank you, Priscilla, for being here again to continue this conversation really about mental health. It's such a broad topic that one week we felt like was just not enough. Last week, you gave us all of your tips and tricks. We've been in a time period of where stress has been building up. It's been about 14 weeks now since the lockdown started. And people are starting to feel it. And last week you told us that the two things that really helped through that time is a routine and relationships. So can you give us a quick recap of what you talked about?
Yeah, absolutely. So routine is really important just to create stability. So if you wake up at 8 o'clock in the morning to get ready to go to work, then even though in lockdown, in quarantine, you still wake up at 8 o'clock in the morning. If you finish work at 5 o'clock in the evening, then make sure you're closing your laptop at 5 in the evening. It's so important to have that routine, to have, even to set the space in the house where you're working and, where you leave that space to come and have meals at the dining table. So it's just bringing structure and routine in your day, even though you're in lockdown. The next thing is just relationships. More than any time in our lives, this is the season where we really need each other. We cannot do without people. We don't do well in isolation. And so we have to take intentional steps to connect with people. So whether you're picking up the phone to call someone or you're sending a voice note, I mentioned it's important to just hear voice. Don't just drop a WhatsApp message. Just pick up the phone, call someone, engage with people. That's key.
Yeah, that's both really, really helpful tips. Well, I know this past week I had quite a few friends who lost their jobs. And that can bring just another level of stress that if they were already experiencing stress to begin with. So how can we not just survive through this time, but actually thrive through this time?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's a hard one to concise into a short conversation, but I'm going to try my best. Losing something, anytime we lose something, is obviously you're going through a period of grief as well. So there's a sense of loss. And so we kind of have to acknowledge that we have lost, and this is a job, and where a job has probably kept most of us here in the UAE as well. So it's a big loss. It's a financial loss, and then that probably would require us a decision now. What are we going to take in the next season of life? Are we going to move out? Are we going to stay here? What's going to happen? So first thing is to really just understand the level of grief, acknowledge that there has been a loss. But the thing about grief is that it can keep us stuck. If we don't start to process through those feelings of grief, sadness, what happens eventually, we get stuck in discouragement, we get demotivated, unable to see what's coming in our future. Because one of the things that that helps us move from sadness to survival to thriving is to be able to walk through seasons like this where it's uncomfortable. I tell people all the time, get get comfortable with the uncomfortable.
I think that's key.
It's not easy, but we've got to. I mean, life is full of challenges. This is just one really unusual challenge, of course. So to process through grief, it's key. We need to be able to process our feelings of sadness and loss. So what really helps in moving us forward is to start to plan the future. In a sense, it's to start to have vision for what is to come, because we all have to rebuild our financial lives. We all have to rebuild our new lives if we are moving out of the country. What is that going to look like? So basically coming up with a plan. Looking at coming up with a plan. Yeah,
that makes sense. I know for me as a pastor, I say all the time that vision leaks. So maybe is it the same way where you have to continue to tell yourself, hey, this is where we're headed. Because maybe you forget or that vision leaks away. What are some tips that you can give that will help people move forward?
So, that's really great that you say vision leaks, because that's absolutely it. Because once we start planning for our future, it gives us a sense of purpose. It gives us a sense of like we're building something again. So they may have been lost, but we're building a new future. We're building a new life. We're building a new financial plan. Because a lot of us will probably have to look at our finances and see how now we have to manage, strategize. There's a lot that's involved now. So this is where it's interesting from where I spoke last week, where, relationships are key. Now we get to lean into our spouse or lean into someone else to get wisdom on how to plan our finances, for example. So sit down and look at that. We pull out the map, the budget sheets and all of that. What is that going to look like moving forward? You're planning for 3 months or you're planning for 6 months. That's just one aspect. We are writing down what is it going to look like now if we if we budget, how much do we have to save? If you're going to be now moving in a month's time, the things that we need to do. So really, when we're sitting and doing a plan, we're writing things down. And I always tell people it's good to start to write things down rather than visualize it in your head. We've got to write it down, because the more we write it down, the more we can see it, the more clear it becomes. So writing our plan, building our future, it's our finances, our relocation, or maybe we're looking at innovating ourselves here. We're looking at perhaps setting up ourselves here differently in the UAE. Maybe we'll start our business that we always put on the back burner. When we start to build like that, what happens is we're now taking risk. And so when we start to actually take risk and we're starting to think through these things, the fear is sort of dissipating. We're not being controlled by fear, because every time we step out of the boat and try to do something different, there's no longer fear. And we realize what's in front of us was actually, okay, this is not so bad. So it's one step and the next step and the next step. And as we keep moving forward, before you know it, you're not even worried anymore. You've got a sense of purpose that you're building towards.
I see. So planning for the future helps relieve some of the stress.
Absolutely.
And I know when I've experienced, when I start planning for the future, I'm really planning for things I think are going to happen, but it may not happen.
Yeah.
How does someone, and I think you talked about this a little bit last week, talking about trust.
Yeah.
Because really you're making decisions on the future that you really don't know. You're kind of guessing, honestly, but you're trying, it's an educated guess.
Yeah.
I would say, but maybe talk a little bit about trust again and maybe trusting God throughout this whole process.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that we actually, and people probably are not aware of this, we come into this world, the first thing that we learn when our parents changed our diapers and gave us milk is to actually understand basic trust. Basic trust is actually being developed on the inside. We learn to trust people, we learn to trust our caregivers from the time we are babies. And so that's it's interesting, because that's how God designed us to be. And the more that we can trust, whether it's trust God and trust people around us, the less we fear. And so one of the key things is, if people are going through so much of stress and, when it comes to stress, when we talk about stress, really it has its roots in fear. Yeah. Even anxiety and worry, it's all rooted in fear. And the Bible says God has not given us a spirit of fear, but power, love, and a sound mind. So we got to learn how to overcome fear in difficult seasons. And the main thing is to actually learn to trust. Where we are so shaken, the reason is because we lack trust. So whether it's trust in God, or I say this very commonly as well to people whom I work with, the more self-sufficient we are, the less we trust.
The way that I've heard it spoke about is where do I put my focus? When I'm really worried, I'm putting my focus, or you can almost put trust in that fear, and that I'm putting my trust in the worry.
Yep.
But if I take my focus off of that and I put my focus on God, on my relationships, that fear tends to be less.
Absolutely. So it's turning our focus from inward to outward. So I'm outwardly focusing on God now. Yeah. I'm outwardly focusing on community now. Every time we turn our focus outward, the less stress we feel, the less fearful we become. That actually builds trust. So that's key. That's fundamental. And so the basic step at this point of time is, and sometimes trust and having faith is, you don't see the whole picture.
Yeah. that happens a lot, actually.
Yeah, you don't. Yeah. You kind of have to, trust that voice, or trust that spouse, your spouse, or trust God, or trust your leader in your community, that, you know what, this is the time to kind of step out of the boat and walk on water. You can actually do it. You just have to give it a try. So every time we try something new, or we step out and we start to do something differently, we change our focus. All of that helps us move forward. So we move from survival mode and we start thriving, because we're moving forward. Because we are people that we need to keep moving forward. If we're stuck, we're going to have more stress. The key is to keep moving forward.
Yeah. Well, that's very helpful. I know for a lot of people who have lost their jobs recently, that the key to move from surviving to thriving is to continue to move forward and keep your focus on moving forward. Keep your focus on your family, your friends, God.
Yeah.
And that's going to lower the stress and help you move to a thriving.
Absolutely. And just keep in mind that God says in Jeremiah 29:11 that we always have, God has a plan and a purpose for us.
Yeah.
So it always is a plan. There's always a good outcome. Eventually it's going to turn out to be okay.
I found that so true in my life so many times.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, thank you, Priscilla. I know this is going to really help a lot of people, and I just thank you for your time. And if someone wants to get in contact with you, how would they find you?
They can go up, look me up on my website at estherprojectdxp.com. So that's Esther, ESTHER, DXP.com.
Great. Well, I hope that you're able to help a lot more people like you've helped us here today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Thanks.